It began with a cart and a question that would unravel not just a family's legacy, but a silence so thick it had curdled in the soil for over 30 years. In the fading autumn of 1872, Elias Trammell, a land surveyor hired by the state of Pennsylvania, made his way through the forgotten byways of Black Hollow, a dense, mist-choked stretch of woodland tucked behind the hills of Lycoming County. The land had long been dropped from county records, lost in bureaucratic limbo after the deaths of a once prominent family known as the Thorntons. Elias wasn't looking for ghosts or legends. He was a practical man, his mind occupied with boundary lines, drainage paths, and logging rights. But as he urged his mule forward along a road that had narrowed into a tunnel of tangled trees, the animal bucked and stalled with a noise like a strangled scream. It refused to move another inch. Not forward, not back. The wind that had accompanied him all morning had died entirely. No rustle of leaves, no chirp of bird, not even the buzz of a late-season fly. Just stillness, heavy and expectant, like an audience holding its breath. Irritated, Elias dismounted and walked ahead alone, pushing aside a thick curtain of ivy that revealed the top of a rusted iron gate, bent and half swallowed by the ground. He followed it to its center, where the name Thornton curved across the arch in flaking brass letters. The gate creaked open without resistance, groaning like an old man waking up from too long a nap. Beyond the threshold, time had stopped. A stone path, broken and swallowed in parts by the grass, led to the blackened skeleton of a house, its bones wrapped in creeping ivy, its windows like gouged-out eyes. Chimneys rose like scorched sentinels, and the walls sagged with the weariness of memory. Elias stepped inside, past the ruined foyer, where rain and rot had carved through the flues, and found himself in what must have been a grand hall once. Plasterwork still hinted at cherubic frescoes, now faded into smudges of ash and mildew. The house spoke in sighs, of wind slipping through broken beams, of walls settling after decades of being ignored. But it was not the house that made his skin tighten with dread. It was what lay behind it. There, nestled in the grove behind the mansion, was a graveyard, rows upon rows of tombstones, all listing at odd angles, some swallowed by roots, others split as if by lightning. Elias stepped closer, brushing aside tall grass to read the names. His stomach dropped. Every stone bore the same last name. Thornton. Dozens of them. Fathers, mothers, sons, daughters. No in-laws, no outsiders. Just Thorntons, a lineage stacked in stone. Some markers were small and narrow, belonging to children. Far too many children, all of whom had died young, some within days of each other. One row in particular caught his eye. 6 graves, all in a perfect line, all dated 1839. The air was colder here, too cold for the season, and the sun, once a pale gold, now seemed drained of warmth. At the center of the cemetery stood a mausoleum, a squat, gray building flanked by crumbling angel statues whose eyes had eroded into featureless pits. It had no visible door, only a massive stone slab that looked recently disturbed, pushed aside just enough to reveal a black void within. Elias hesitated, lantern trembling in his hand. Curiosity overtook caution, and he stepped inside. The air grew thick and wet, like exhaled breath in a cellar sealed for generations. Along the back wall were 6 niches, each labeled with a child's name: Abigail, Miriam, Jonas, Ruth, Elias, a name that made the surveyor shudder, and Micah. Each had died in the same summer. Some etched dates suggested gaps of only days. Sisters buried days after brothers. Boys buried the day afters. Girls. These children had not died of time or age. Something had come for them. At the base of one of the tombs, moss had been scraped away by what looked like fingernails, and there, etched in a child's jagged hand, was the phrase, "We weren't supposed to hear him." Elias stumbled back out into the dying light, heart pounding, mouth dry. That night, too shaken to leave, he made camp near the mausoleum, lighting a fire that gave off more shadow than warmth. He didn't sleep. The silence pressed in on him from every direction, not empty, but full of unsaid things, of breath held in unseen lungs. At precisely 3 a.m, he heard it. Footsteps, bare, slow, deliberate, crunching dry leaves in a circle around his tent. He rose with his lantern, holding it high, but saw nothing beyond its flickering reach. Then, with growing horror, he saw footprints, small ones, barefoot, child-sized, leading from the mausoleum to the largest grave in the yard, marked simply Thomas Thornton, 1793 to 1840. The prints stopped there, facing the grave, as if whoever made them had gone down into the earth. Elias packed his things before dawn and rode out without breakfast, ignoring his mule's shudders. Back in town, Elias visited the county archives, a cramped office stuffed with ledgers and mildew. He found the Thornton family mentioned sparsely, wealthy landowners, owners of several mills, known for strict religious practice and homeschooling, but after 1840 they vanished. No wills, no transfers, no mention of survivors. Just a cryptic note written by a local reverend. The Thornton children have been returned to the earth. May silence follow them. No police reports, no news articles. Just a vacuum where a family once stood. When Elias asked around, the oldest residents grew pale at the mention of the name. "Leave it," one said. "That house buried more than just bones." Another muttered, "Their silence was bought, boy. Bought and paid in blood." That night, Elias felt something strange. His dreams were invaded, not with images, but with sensations. The feeling of standing in soil too soft, of whispers that fluttered like moths against the ears, of cold, childish fingers wrapping gently around his ankle and pulling downward. When he awoke, his boots were soaked in mud. The grave dirt had followed him home. The days that followed grew stranger. Elias's hair began to thin and whiten at the temples. His nails became brittle, and his speech faltered. He began scribbling maps of the Thornton property over and over, unable to stop, each one featuring the mausoleum more prominently, as if it grew more important with every passing day. Finally, in desperation, he returned to the site, this time with stakes and a plan. He would chart every grave, every line, every anomaly. But the land had changed. The iron gate was bent differently. The headstones now shifted, realigned in new rows. The 6 children's graves were now in a circle around their fathers, and a 7th headstone had appeared, unmarked but freshly disturbed. The soil was darker, still moist, and beside it a wooden toy lay half buried, a spinning top, still faintly humming. Elias fell to his knees, clutching his head as the silence screamed in his ears. The truth was no longer hiding. It was demanding. Something had been buried alive, not bodies, but time itself. And now it was waking. 3 months after Elias Trammell vanished without warning from his modest boarding room, his bed unslept in, boots still by the door, and a map of the Thornton estate nailed into the wall with pins that bled rust, a new name appeared in the county's restoration ledger. Lydia Crane, age 27, recent graduate of the Philadelphia Historical Society's preservation program. Known for her rationality, her sharp eye for structural decay, and an unwavering skepticism toward local folklore, which she found equal parts charming and ridiculous. She had read about Elias's strange behavior in a short Archie. Ved Mimo, his name circled in red pen beside the word delusional, and thought little of it, until she stood at the overgrown edge of the Thornton estate herself, boots buried in soggy leaves, and here, heart fluttering with an unease she couldn't explain, the ground beneath her feet disturbingly soft, as if someone had tilled it recently. Not for planting, but for burying something hurriedly, imperfectly. And the moment she crossed the rusted, broken gate, the air itself seemed to dim and pull inward, as if the light outside no longer applied here. The house loomed as it had in the photos. Roof partially collapsed, chimneys split like broken teeth, ivy curling around shattered glass. But it wasn't the visible decay that disturbed her. It was the eerie sense of suspended motion, as if the structure had not crumbled from age but had simply paused, waiting for an occupant to notice it again. And when she stepped inside the hollowed threshold, the silence met her like a living thing, thick, attentive, unblinking. Despite the ruin, she noticed peculiar pockets of uncanny preservation. A rocking chair swaying slightly as if someone had just left it, a shelf of leather-bound books unmarked by mold or time, and a porcelain doll perched on the fireplace mantel, its face uncracked, its eyes turned toward the overgrown windows as though watching the graveyard beyond. And Lydia, who had documented hundreds of historical anomalies in derelict homes, felt her confidence falter for the first time as she explored deeper into the study, where beneath warped and creaking floorboards she discovered a tin box wrapped in wax cloth. Sealed so tightly she had to break the edge with her boot heel, and inside, stacked and aged with care, were 23 handwritten letters, all unsent, all addressed only to Mother, the ink browned but legible. The handwriting beginning in the careful loops of children and ending in the deteriorating scrawl of a desperate adult, and, as she read, her breath caught. The earliest letters were sweet, full of childish nonsense. Micah fell off the swing today, and Blake med Ruth, but Father said boys don't cry. But by letter 7 the tone changed, the language sharpened. Jonas says he hears someone in the floorboards. He said they talk backwards. I told him to stop, but he won't. And by letter 12, it became evident these were not ordinary children's letters. They spoke of night terrors, of waking up in unfamiliar rooms soaked to the bone with black water, of the gray man standing just outside the graveyard, unmoving and tall, cloaked not in shadow, but in something older than dark. Always watching the house but never entering. And Lydia, rational as she was, found her hands trembling, especially when she reached the final 3 letters, all from Thomas Thornton himself, whose script spiraled into erratic, jagged lines. I hear them in the chimney again. They do not burn, no matter how hot the fire. They come from the stones, from the deal my grandfather made in the old country, and now it is not just the children. It is in the walls. It is in me. And then the last letter, dated July 3rd, 1840, read simply, I have locked the vault. I cannot bury them again. Whatever was promised, I cannot fulfill. If you read this, forgive me. The blood remembers. The earth will not forget. Her breath quickened, the room growing tighter, as though the walls were inhaling slowly, and her eyes kept darting to the fireplace, to the doll, to the shadow that hadn't moved, but now seemed closer, leaning slightly, its presence pressing against the corners of her vision without ever stepping into the light, and something in her, the same instinct that had told her which floorboards would hold and which ones would crack, drew her back outside, past the collapsed staircase and into the graveyard where the mausoleum sat like a patient wound. Still without a door, still dark and yawning, and she approached the entrance, eyes narrowing at the disturbed moss. Say, along the edge where a slab had once sealed something in, not out. Gripping her flashlight, Lydia entered, and the air immediately thickened, damp and sour, tinged with the coppery tang of old blood. And mildew, and she saw, just as she feared, that it was not a mausoleum in the traditional sense. It was an entrance to something deeper, older, constructed beneath the graveyard itself, a sloping tunnel of old brick descending into shadow, its walls lined with crumbling symbols half hidden beneath soot and roots that pulsed faintly, like veins in a living thing, and as she stepped downward, the sound of the outside world ceased completely, not dimmed, but erased, as if she had crossed into a vacuum beneath the soil, and the further she walked, the heavier her chest became, until it felt as if she was breathing through wet cloth, and at the tunnel's end her light flicked across the shapes of 7 wooden coffins stacked haphazardly like crates in a cellar, their surfaces charred along the edges as if scorched with fire in a futile effort to cleanse something, each one sealed with thick iron nails but all perfectly intact. Except one splintered at the top, the wood peeled outward as though something had clawed its way out from within, and beside it, on the soot-blackened wall, was a child's drawing, 6 stick figures holding hands beneath a jagged black circle with rays like thorns, and above it, scrawled in handwriting far too neat for a child's hand, the words, "We're not all asleep." And Lydia, now dizzy, heart hammering in her throat, backed away, nearly dropping her flashlight. And as she turned to flee, she heard it. The soft click of a spinning top against stone, the faint giggle of a child echoing behind her, not playful but hollow, mocking, ancient, and she ran, scraping her hands along the brick, tripping once but never stopping, not even when she reached the graveyard and found the doll from the mantel now resting gently at the base of Thomas Thornton's grave, facing downward as though ashamed. She didn't speak to the county representative when she returned, protruding from the dirt like a jagged tooth, and without thinking he reached out and brushed it clean, revealing the name Abigail Thornton, D. 1839, and just below, in near invisible etching, "We never left," which he laughed off as Victorian melodrama, until the wind, which had been absent all day, suddenly rose with a hiss, bending trees not toward but away from the graveyard, and something, not an animal, not a machine, clicked in the air, mechanical yet rhythmic, like a child's toy spinning in the leaves. Rudy stumbled back, disoriented, and in doing so kicked the loose soil beneath the headstone and uncovered not bones but a long strand of red hair, thick and smooth as if freshly shed. He screamed and ran, and by morning the development had been paused, pending a site integrity investigation that quietly devolved into silence. Within a week, Halbrook had sold the land back to the county for pennies, and it returned once more to its vigil of overgrowth and forgetting, until in 1994 a rising wave of paranormal enthusiasm brought whispers of the graveyard that rearranged itself, and into that obsession stepped Jonah Lee, a podcaster whose reputation was built on half-truths and strange recordings, and who arrived at the Thornton property with 3 cameras, 2 EMF readers, a thermal drone, and an unsettling eagerness to provoke what others feared, ignoring the rusted sign on the gate that read, "This ground is closed by state order." Do not disturb the silence, stepping instead over vines and into the whisper-thick air with a smile and a mic. The sun dipped, and Jonah recorded himself narrating the sight, but by midnight his tone had changed. Subtle at first, then increasingly strained, his breathing shallow, his commentary interrupted by pauses in which he seemed to be listening to something just outside the audio frame. That night, he uploaded footage that chill of a spinning top behind her, followed by the click-click-click of bare feet pacing the grave rows, and when she emerged from the gate, shaking and tear-streaked, she collapsed and would never speak again, committed shortly after to a psychiatric facility in Harrisburg, where she painted the same picture over and over, 7 stick figures holding hands beneath a black sun, surrounded by roots that twisted into faces. The site, now a whispered dare among thrill-seeking teens, became known as the cemetery that refused to die, its legend fed by every disappearance, every unexplained silence, until the state finally posted cameras. But each one failed within 24 hours, corroded, memory cards wiped clean, and the only footage recovered was a still frame of a young boy's face staring directly into the lens. Eyes empty, mouth slightly open, with long strands of red hair falling across his face, though no such boy was known to live within 50 miles of the site. Today, the Thornton land is marked on no GPS, and even satellite images blur it, a trick of light or data error no one knows, but locals say the humming still rises at night from beneath the soil, faint as breath and rhythmic like a lullaby. And every July 3rd, whether by storm or dry heat, wild roses bloom in thick clusters around each grave, their petals deep crimson and their roots unfathomably long, sometimes lifting the stones themselves as if trying to pull them back toward the sky, and those who have dared to smell the blooms report the scent not of flowers but of singed wood, old iron, and the faint, bitter tang of blood. The town no longer speaks of the Thorntons, and their name has been wiped from municipal records, but in a locked drawer of the local library, labeled simply "Do Not File," sits a dusty journal kept by the last caretaker of the graveyard before it was abandoned, containing only one entry, written